Hey guys, tonight we drift back, way back, to the dusty courtyards of ancient Babylon. You're standing in sandals, the sun beating down, the air thick with incense and goat smell, and your job, should you accept this impossibly boring mission, is to watch a shadow slowly, ever so slowly, move across some cracked clay tiles. Yes, this is real history. You're a humble apprentice, learning how to tell time before clocks were cool, or even existed. There's no tick-tock here, just tick shadows. And you probably won't survive this, mostly from boredom or heat stroke. But there's something oddly soothing about it all. Something hypnotic about the slow, deliberate way this civilization measured the moments of the day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's see how many time zones we can gather under this sleepy Babylonian sky. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the sun. The courtyard is wide, paved with uneven stones that trap heat like some cruel practical joke. The sky above you is pale blue, nearly white. There are no clouds. There never are. Babylon doesn't do shade, unless you're rich or sacred. You're neither. Across from you, a priest, wrapped in ceremonial linen, smelling vaguely of frankincense and knowledge, gestures to the center of the yard. There it is, a stick. Okay, not just any stick. It's set into a square slab of stone, standing proudly at a 90-degree angle, and its skinny little shadow is pointing somewhere between just after coffee and maybe time to feed the oxen. This, you're told, is a gnomon. Try not to laugh at the name. This stick, roughly the size of your forearm, is how Babylon tells time. Not with gears or springs or even water drips, but with shadows. When the sun moves, the shadow shifts, and if you're trained to read it, you can divide the day into parts. Not hours yet, those are coming, but something close enough to organize prayer, meals, sacrifices, and, yes, those goat-washing appointments. You kneel beside the gnomon, its base hot under your fingers, and trace your own finger along one of several small carved lines radiating outward from it. Some are deeper than others, worn smooth by years of fingers like yours, apprentices learning the ancient art of not being late. You're told each mark corresponds to a part of the sun's journey. No watches, no alarms, just solar geometry and the kind of focus you only get from not having Netflix. Historians still argue whether this setup was strictly a sundial, or more like a ceremonial timekeeping ritual. But either way, it worked. Babylon had something most of the world didn't, a calendar you could read on the ground. As the sun continues creeping overhead, like it's in no particular rush, you realize how intuitive this all is. The shadow starts long, then shrinks, then stretches again. No batteries. No ticking. Just cosmic choreography between light and stone. You kind of respect it. Also, you're slightly sunburnt already. And here's a weird little footnote. Some ancient gnomons were tilted slightly, not straight up, so they could align better with the sun's arc across the sky. That's a level of nerd you didn't expect from people who also believed the world was a flat disk surrounded by salty chaos water. There's something peaceful here, even with your sweat pooling in your sandals. The shadow moves, and you watch it like a cat watches a bug. Slow, alert, kind of mesmerized. You're learning that this isn't just about time. It's about order. About knowing when to pray, when to trade, when to build a ziggurat or eat your one humble lentil lunch. The priest beside you coughs, not rudely, but just enough to bring you back to focus. You're supposed to be sketching this down in your clay tablet. The stylus, made of bone, scratches softly as you carve tiny wedge-shaped cuneiform impressions to mark the date and the sun's position. It's probably the slowest, quietest journal entry ever written. You kind of like it. You glance up at the priest. He's staring into the shadow like it's whispering secrets. Maybe it is. These people weren't just measuring the day. They were trying to connect it to everything. To crops, floods, dreams, and the moods of gods. Babylonian timekeeping wasn't just a science. It was a theology of the sky. And as you sit there, letting the light shift by fractions of inches, you start to feel that too. That quiet awe. That ancient, uncomfortable realization. Time doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. Over the rooftops, you hear someone chanting. Maybe a merchant advertising barley, or a scribe reciting star names. The city bustles beyond the courtyard walls. But here, inside, it's slow, deliberate. You don't even check your phone. Because 1, it hasn't been invented yet. And 2, you're starting to get into the rhythm of shadow time. At some point, you swear you see the gnomon quiver. Just a trick of heat waves, probably. Or maybe time really is alive here. Quirky tidbit. There's a half-serious theory that these early gnomons may have originally doubled as sun snakes, mythical representations of solar power coiled on the ground. It's fringe, but hey, ancient symbolism got weird. As the sun begins its gentle arc toward afternoon, you press your fingers into the warm clay one more time and feel the earth turning beneath you. Slowly, quietly, unbothered by your schedule. You blink, and the shadow has moved again. You wake up, or maybe you never quite fell asleep, still crouched in that sweltering courtyard, the gnomon casting its lazy afternoon finger across the stone. But now you're not alone. There's more activity around you. A soft shuffle of sandals, the dull thump of papyrus scrolls being unrolled, and the telltale scent of ancient body odor gently rising like a blessing from the earth. You've been summoned into the shadowy interior of a temple complex, which in Babylon usually means you're either important or about to get yelled at for smudging sacred lines in the dirt. But lucky you, it's a lesson day. You're shadowing, pun completely intended, a group of priest scholars who spend their days staring at shadows and muttering to each other about celestial omens, crop cycles, and which god might smite which city this week. These are the temple timekeepers. You're not sure what their official title is. Historians argue whether they were astronomers, priests, or something in between, but you know one thing, they take this whole measuring light thing very seriously. Like, way more seriously than you take brushing your teeth. One of them, a man with a shiny bald head and an ink-stained robe, nods at you. You're handed a clay tablet with grooves already carved into it, and you're told to wait until the shadow hits the third notch from the left.
Why?
Because that's when the purification ritual starts. Obviously. You sit. You wait. You stare at a square of sunlight as it slowly crawls toward the groove. This is your life now. There's something a little obsessive about the way these temple folks operate. They don't just watch shadows. They log them. Daily. Meticulously. Like clockwork, if clocks existed. Some days the shadow moves faster. Some days slower. They take notes, compare angles, and occasionally argue in a low, scratchy tone that always ends in one of them sighing and poking at the slab with a reed stylus. Their records, etched on cuneiform tablets, are among the earliest data logs in human history. This isn't just superstition. This is serious observational science, thousands of years before the word science was invented. The temple courtyard you're in is designed on purpose for this. Every wall, every pillar, every open-air gap is angled with math-like intent. When the sun hits certain points, usually at solstices or equinoxes, rituals begin. Bells ring. Offerings are burned. You're really hoping the offerings don't include you. And speaking of solstices, here's a quirky fact. Some Babylonian temples were constructed so that, on one specific day of the year, the sunrise would shine directly through a narrow hallway and illuminate the innermost altar. That kind of theatrical precision. Chefs kiss it with stone and sunlight. You're starting to understand something deeper now. These timekeepers aren't just doing this to figure out when to eat lunch. They're creating a cosmic map. One that links days to divine cycles. When the shadow touches this line, Marduk is pleased. When it misses, better skip the boat trip and maybe don't start any new businesses. But let's pause here for a debate that still keeps some historians mildly caffeinated. Were these temples truly designed only for timekeeping? Or was that just a convenient side effect of their solar alignment? Some argue that tracking time was just one tool in a larger religious performance. Others say it was the main attraction, and everything else, the chants, the offerings, even the gods themselves, were scaffolding around the act of measuring the eternal tick. You pick at your tunic as the sun finally edges across that third groove. The priest nods. People begin moving around you with soft, practiced coordination. A ceramic bowl is filled with water and herbs. A goat, looking unimpressed, is led in and tied near the altar. You realize this whole thing is happening not because someone looked at a calendar, but because a shadow told them it was time. And somewhere in the middle of this low-tech precision, you find something weirdly calming. The priest-scribes chant softly now, facing a stone relief etched with symbols so ancient even they probably don't fully understand them. But it doesn't matter. The shadow fell on the right line. That's the proof they need. Another priest appears, this one holding a small, flat bronze plate. It's polished, not to eat off of, but to reflect sunlight onto the floor. You watch in slow-motion amazement as the reflected beam tracks across the room, hitting a wall-mounted slab where time is etched in angled rays. It's like watching a sundial's cousin doing interpretive dance indoors. Here's your fringe tidbit for this sleepy scroll of knowledge. Some Babylonian texts suggest the use of portable shadow devices, early pocket sundials, if you will. You imagine someone pulling one out like, "Hold on, let me check the time," as they squint at a wobbly shadow under their armpit. Fashionable? Maybe not. Practical? In the desert? Oh yes. You exhale as the ceremony winds down, the goat still mercifully unharmed. Incense fills the air again, sweet and thick. You're guided outside, blinking into the light. You walk past younger apprentices, still scribbling onto clay tablets and tripping over their robes. You smile because earlier that was you. Back in the main courtyard, the gnomon's shadow is shorter now, nearly vertical. It's close to midday, the halfway point of this solar ballet. You stretch your arms and, for a second, use your own body like a human sundial. Your shadow falls to the west. You laugh softly to yourself. You're starting to read light like a language. And honestly, you didn't expect this job to be so hypnotic. You feel part of something ancient, eternal, and just the right kind of boring. The kind of boring that lets your mind wander while your body stays still. Just as you settle into the rhythm again, a younger priest plops down beside you with a tablet and a smirk. He says, "They used to say if you watched the shadow too long, your soul would leave your body and become a sand beetle." You blink. He's definitely joking. Probably. Maybe. Either way, you stop staring quite so hard. Just in case. The next morning, if you can call it that, when your bed was a stone bench and your pillow a folded robe, you're stirred awake not by birdsong or alarm, but by the sun itself, already flaring like a vengeful spotlight through the east-facing slit of a temple wall. You sit up, bones creaking in protest, and remember, today the gnomon gets its due. That skinny, lonely stick standing proud in the courtyard? It's not just a placeholder anymore. Today, you finally get to learn the details of how it became the ancient world's hottest gadget. And yes, it's just a stick. But not just any stick. It's called a gnomon, and it's the entire backbone of Babylonian solar timekeeping. You never thought you'd wake up excited about geometry, but here we are. You shuffle outside, rubbing sleep from your eyes, and find a group already forming around a fresh slab of stone. A new gnomon is being installed. Ceremony optional, sweat mandatory. A young acolyte, who definitely skipped arm day, struggles to hold the vertical post while an older priest fusses over its angle, its base, and the way the light hits it. You squint. "It's just a stick," you whisper to yourself. But even you know better now. The placement of the gnomon is everything. Too far off true north. The shadow curve is wrong. Too tall. You won't measure hours accurately. Too short. The noon shadow just becomes a sad, and no one likes a sad. Historians still argue whether Babylon's gnomons were standardized or if they varied from city to city like homemade pizza recipes. Some argue they were aligned with particular stars, others say magnetic north, which they couldn't have known, and a few fringe thinkers believe they were placed based on the whims of local goats. You sit cross-legged as the elder explains how the gnomon casts a shadow that shortens as the sun climbs, then lengthens again in the afternoon. Over time, the priests learn to chart this curve and mark predictable patterns. Like solar jazz. Today's lesson: measuring the length of the noon shadow during different seasons. It's the simplest way to approximate the sun's highest point in the sky. When the gnomon's shadow is shortest, the sun is at its zenith. The longer the shadow gets from day to day at noon, the closer you are to winter. It's both basic and genius. No apps. No gears. Just light and stone and a long memory. You begin tracing lines in the dirt with a bit of broken pottery, copying the shape of the shadow as it creeps along. Here's something that's delightfully weird. Some Babylonian temples didn't just measure time with vertical gnomons. They experimented with bent or curved gnomons, supposedly to track dual shadows for redundancy or possibly spiritual symbolism. One theory suggests these twin shadows represented the duality of divine and human will. Another theory: someone dropped a gnomon and just rolled with it. You pause, glancing at the freshly mounted stick now standing upright in its slab like it's ready to win a minimalist sculpture contest. The priest invites you to measure its shadow at set intervals. You're handed a knotted cord, a sort of ancient tape measure, and a clay stylus to record each length. And yes, this is how you're spending your morning. But here's the thing: it feels good. The slow rhythm of checking, marking, measuring. There's a whisper of meditative calm in the repetition. You feel tethered to the earth and sky in a way that's hard to describe without sounding like someone who owns too many crystals. Each mark in the dust becomes a little moment of triumph. You begin to see the shadows curve, morning shadows longer and slanted. Approaching noon they straighten, shrink, and then reverse the dance. It's like watching time stretch and contract before your very eyes. And here's your required mainstream historical fact. The gnomon is one of the oldest scientific instruments in recorded history. The Babylonians didn't invent it. That honor may go to the ancient Chinese or Egyptians, but they made it an institutional tool, embedding it in temple routines and state calendars. A priest walks by and mutters a riddle about the sun's eye watching the earth. You nod solemnly like you understand. You do not. But you do understand the shadow. And for now, that's enough. As the shadow reaches its shortest point, you've been watching closely, and this moment feels oddly thrilling. You press a small wedge mark into your clay tablet. That's the solar noon. You caught it. You, a formerly unremarkable apprentice, captured a moment the sun stood highest in the Babylonian sky. You glance around to see if anyone noticed your triumph. No one has. Everyone's busy measuring their own. You smile. Fair enough. Here's your quirky tidbit. In later Babylonian texts, gnomons are sometimes metaphorically linked to the spine of the world, suggesting they viewed it as a divine axis connecting heaven and earth. So next time you see a sundial, it's not just a garden decoration. It's a celestial vertebra. The priest claps once. Measurement session over. You wipe your hands on your robe and stand up slowly, feeling the dull ache of still growing knees and a lower back that was absolutely not made for crouching 3 hours at a time. You head toward the shade, what little there is, and pause to look back at the gnomon. Its shadow is beginning to lengthen again, sweeping eastward like a lazy arm reaching out. And for a brief moment, you wonder how many other people, over how many thousands of years, have watched the same thing. Different empires, different languages, same sun, same shadow, same timeless silence. You close your eyes. Let the warmth hit your eyelids. Time passes. Literally, visibly, softly. The afternoon wears on, and your eyelids flutter open just as the shadow of the gnomon stretches past the second ring etched into the stone, your unofficial Babylonian snooze alarm. You stand, stretch, and crack your neck like someone 3 times your age. The priest who had you marking shadow lengths earlier now beckons with a crook of his finger. You trudge behind him, half curious, half regretting skipping breakfast, until he brings you into a narrow room on the western side of the temple. Here, everything is dim. One narrow slit in the wall lets in a clean blade of light, falling perfectly across a carved tablet on the opposite wall. This, he says without looking at you, is where the real calculations happen. Welcome to the math chamber. Or, as you're now mentally calling it, the Babylonian nerd cave. Stacks of clay tablets line the room, carefully arranged and gently dusted. Some of them are just grooves and marks. Others have fully detailed cuneiform inscriptions. You quickly realize this isn't just about watching shadows anymore. This is about translating them into numbers, into calendars, into meaning. Turns out, Babylonian timekeeping wasn't just done with eyes and sticks. It relied on mathematics, a word that should strike fear into every sleepy listener's heart. But don't worry, this won't hurt much. Mostly because the Babylonians didn't count the way you do. They used base, 60, or sexagesimal numbers. Yeah, base, 60. That's right. 60 different symbols, grouped in combinations to count things. Which sounds like a math nightmare until you realize you still use it every day. 60 seconds in a minute. 60 minutes in an hour. That's not a modern invention. That's a dusty Babylonian ghost still haunting your watch. Historians still argue whether the base 60 system was chosen purely for mathematical convenience. 60 has a lot of divisible factors, after all, or whether it had symbolic religious significance. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe they just got tired of counting on their fingers and toes. The priest hands you a freshly fired tablet. It's still warm. That's oddly comforting. You squint at the columns of impressions, groups of wedge-shaped symbols in patterns you've only started to recognize. He points to one group. This, he says, marks the moment of shadow reversal. You realize he's referring to solar noon. They didn't have 12 p.m., but they had a way to write when the gnomon's shadow stopped shortening and began to stretch again. They'd record the lengths in units called ush, a rough approximation of a modern hour, although it varied depending on the season. Because here's the kicker, Babylonian hours weren't fixed. A daytime hour in summer might be longer than one in winter, because daylight itself shifts. So their timekeeping was not rigid, it breathed with the seasons. Imagine your modern watch doing that. Sorry I'm late, my hour stretched today. Sounds fake, but it's how the ancients rolled. And speaking of rollable things, here's a fun fringe theory. Some scholars think Babylonian astronomers may have used circular dials drawn in sand or scratched on clay to model the passage of time. Like a sundial but indoors, simulated with oil lamps and sticks. There's no definitive archaeological proof yet, but enough ambiguous records and poetic descriptions to make it a delightful maybe. You're handed a stylus. The priest points at a section of the tablet. Copy. You do. Slowly. Carefully. The stylus feels clumsy in your hand, and the clay isn't as forgiving as paper. One wrong push and the wedge goes too deep. But eventually, you get the symbols right. You're copying the day's shadow data, dates, ush units, and scribbled notes like cloudy again and dogs fought at noon. Because apparently even timekeeping logs get a little casual after a few years. One tablet nearby has a faint drawing of what looks suspiciously like a frowning sun. You resist the urge to giggle. This is when it hits you. The real beauty of Babylonian timekeeping wasn't in the act of measuring. It was in the recording, the way they captured time in the permanence of clay, baked into history like cookies with questionable shelf lives. You ask the priest how long these tablets are kept. He shrugs. Until they crumble. Then he grins. Or until we run out of shelf space. A few older tablets are stacked in a corner, crumbling at the edges, their inscriptions half erased by time. You trace one lightly with your fingertip and wonder what forgotten solstice it once recorded. What forgotten priest stared at the same sun you did, worrying about the same shadow you followed this morning. Your head tilts as the priest begins to explain a complex system for predicting eclipses. Yes, eclipses, based on long-term shadow measurements and moon phases. It's more than you can follow, but you catch one word again and again. Saros. The Saros cycle, a roughly 18-year period after which eclipses repeat. The Babylonians were among the first to understand this pattern. You can barely remember your own phone password, and here they are plotting solar events 2 decades out. You lean back against the cool wall and stare at the ceiling. It's low, faintly painted with faded stars. The air smells of clay and ash and something herbal. Time drips here like honey. Your final task for the afternoon is filing. Not thrilling, but kind of satisfying. You carry tablets like precious pizza boxes, stacking them carefully on the designated shelves by date and subject. It's like an ancient library crossed with a ceramic warehouse. Before you leave, you glance back one more time at the room. The slit of sunlight has moved now, crossing the tablet where you started this lesson. The shadow is longer. You've been in here a while. And as you step back into the heat, the gnomon waiting silently in the courtyard greets you like an old friend. Its shadow reaches toward you, a familiar gesture. Another day measured. Another page in the sun's long book turned. You're starting to notice that in Babylon, time doesn't just pass. It stretches, folds, and sometimes sulks in the corner like a teenager asked to sweep the courtyard. Tonight, after a long day of shadow chasing and clay scribbling, you're invited to stay for a more advanced session. You shuffle into the temple's eastern chamber as twilight melts over the ziggurat's shoulders. It's cooler now, and the evening breeze brings the smell of distant cooking fires, roasted onions, something garlicky, maybe goat. You're tired, but curiosity wins. The senior priest, his beard long enough to have its own opinions, leads you toward a low bench, next to a slab etched with concentric rings. It looks like a dartboard made by someone who's never seen a dart. He taps the stone gently with his stylus. "This," he says, "is how we learned to divide the day." Tonight, you meet the first sundials. Not quite like the neat metal ones in modern gardens. These are heavy, stone, and extremely serious about their geometry. The priest calls them shadow clocks, but really they're just a stylized cousin of the gnomon, same principle, but more refined. The disk before you is divided into 12 sectors. Not because hours are universal, but because 12 divisions felt right for symmetry, astrology, and, possibly, because humans have 12 knuckles on 4 fingers. That's one fringe theory you find oddly charming. Historians still argue whether the 12 divisions were based strictly on observation or if they were a carryover from religious or economic systems. Babylonians were nothing if not obsessed with grouping things into dozens. Like ancient egg cartons for ideas. The priest demonstrates how, depending on the season, a shadow cast from the central rod touches each sector at slightly different times. That's the rub. These aren't fixed hourly clocks. They approximate. They breathe, just like the gnomon's midday shrug. You lean in, squinting as he lights a small oil lamp. He holds it above the rod so you can simulate morning, noon, and dusk. The flame flickers, and the shadow moves in slow arcs. It's like watching time in miniature, a tiny day played out in a temple sandbox. Then he hands you the lamp. Your turn. You move the flame slowly from east to west, watching the shadow trail along the markings. It jumps across sectors with each small shift, as if the stone itself is keeping track. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Babylonians developed multiple forms of sundials, some portable and some carved permanently into stone courtyards. They often used them in tandem with star maps to synchronize daytime and nighttime tracking. It's ancient multitasking. And get this, your quirky tidbit for tonight. There's evidence that some high-ranking Babylonian families owned decorative sundials shaped like animals. Lions, bulls, even scorpions. Imagine casually checking the time by glancing at the tail of your stone scorpion. That's rich energy. The priest shifts the lamp lower. The shadow grows longer. "This is the shepherd's hour," he says quietly. "The time when the livestock return." You're struck by how every part of the day had its own flavor, its own role. Time wasn't a grid, it was a story unfolding in stages. The watch of the dawn, the judge's hour, the scribe's ink time, the merchant's reckoning, the evening of embers. No one looked at a watch and said, "It's 5:45. They said, "The market is closing," or "The palm's shadow reaches the third tile." Practical. Yes. Romantic. Absolutely. As night thickens, you follow the priest outside again. Now you understand why so many of the temple's pathways are lined with stones etched with faint radial patterns. They're horizontal sundials, built right into the ground. A dozen priests could check time at once without ever looking up. You pass one etched slab partially buried in sand. It's cracked. Forgotten. But if you look closely, you can still see the wedge marks, the ancient time divisions worn soft by centuries of footsteps. Historians still debate whether these early sundials were used for public timekeeping or strictly for priestly rituals. Were they communal clocks, or secretive tools for astrological ceremony? You can imagine both, a busy courtyard with merchants checking time beside scribes, or a lone priest tracking shadows in solemn silence. You sit near one of these old slabs now. The stars are peeking through the thin clouds above. There's a rustle from the fig trees nearby, probably a lizard or a rat. You're too tired to care. Another priest joins you, this one younger. He points at the sky. "We'll match the star clock soon," he says, "but first, we anchor with the sun." It hits you then, sundials weren't standalone tools. They were starting points for a much larger clockwork, the Babylonian time system stitched daylight to moonlight, shadow to star. You get one part wrong, and the rest unravels like bad weaving. And speaking of weaving, your clothes still smell faintly of dye and ash. You make a mental note to ask the laundry boys if they finally figured out how to remove fermented date juice from linen. Spoiler, they have not. Your brain is mush. The stones beneath you are warm from the day's heat, but cooling fast. You lie down, looking at the gnomon's night silhouette, just a vertical absence now, pointing at the stars like a sundial in denial. Time, in Babylon, is not just a tool. It's a companion. It whispers in light. It leans on the shoulders of stones. It wraps around the ankles of priests and poets alike. And tonight, it wraps gently around you, too. The stars arrive first, like careful guests at a formal dinner, punctual and just a little too bright. You blink up at them from your perch on the temple roof, where someone has laid out woven mats and a small plate of dried figs. You chew one thoughtfully, watching the sky deepen into inky black. The priests call this part of the day the rising of the watchers, when the most reliable clocks in Babylon begin their shift, the stars. You thought gnomons were clever? Wait until you meet the star clocks, cosmic timepieces painted in real time, no batteries required. The priest beside you raises a thin bronze rod and holds it at arm's length, aligning it with a bright point in the east. That's Sirius, he says, although they don't call it that. It's Mulcac Sid, the bow star, herald of the hot season. When it rises just before the sun, you know summer's arrived like a sweaty slap. Star risings, especially heliacal risings, were everything to Babylonian timekeeping. The moment a star first peaks above the horizon at dawn after being invisible for weeks, that was their calendar alert, their seasonal update, their celestial push notification. Your mainstream fact for tonight: Babylonians divided the night into 3 watches, each marked by a different group of stars. Early, middle, and late night. No hours, no minutes. Just changing constellations moving across the heavens like a slow procession of glowing chariots. You're handed a clay tablet covered in tiny scratches. Not cuneiform this time, just rows of notches. Star log, the priest mutters. Each scratch marks the rising or setting of a known star, tracked over years. Some tablets span generations. There's one in the archive that's 300 years old, its edges so worn it feels more like bone than clay. Here comes your quirky tidbit. One ancient astrologer allegedly used a bowl of water and a floating stick to time how long a star took to move between 2 roof tiles, an early combo of water clock and astronomy that's either genius or dangerously soggy. You follow his pointing finger to a thick cluster of stars rising in the northeast. When that reaches zenith, he says, the middle watch ends. This is not metaphorical. There's a literal timeline in the sky. You don't need to imagine it, it's unfolding overhead. But not everyone agreed on which stars should mark which watches. Historians still argue whether these celestial divisions were standardized across cities like Uruk, Nippur, and Babylon itself, or if they were more like regional dialects of time. Some researchers even suspect that rival priesthoods had competing time charts based on their favored constellations. As you lie back on the mat, the roof cooling your back, you realize how different this all feels from the gnomon's sharp noon shadow. Sundials are abrupt. Stars are smooth. One slices the day into bright chunks, the other cradles the night with subtlety. The priest beside you begins murmuring what sounds like a poem. It's a list of stars, each one with a purpose, each one tied to an hourless sense of motion. The line you remember best goes something like, "When the scorpion's tail touches the edge of the bowl, the merchant's sleep is ended." You have no idea what the bowl is, or why merchants are up that early, but it sounds right. Then comes the firefly moment, the star you didn't know you were waiting for. On the southern horizon, it shimmers into view, the planet Venus, blazing like an overachiever. In Babylonian terms, it's Dilbat, and depending on its position, it was either the morning star or the evening star. They tracked it with obsessive precision, especially its strange disappearances and returns. The Venus cycle, its vanishing act behind the sun, then reappearance on the other side, became the bedrock for entire blocks of the Babylonian calendar. And it wasn't just about seasons. Venus was tied to omens. If it rose on a certain day, at a certain time, it might mean peace, or invasion, or a really bad grain yield. You learn that some temple astronomers, officially called Chaldeans, dedicated their entire lives to plotting Venus's schedule, using long columns of rising dates, intercalary months, and even scribbled warnings like, "Cloudy, no star." Even 2,500 years later, some of those records line up stunningly well with modern astronomical software. But here's where it gets delightfully weird. Some fringe scholars believe the Babylonians didn't just observe the stars, they tried to communicate with them. Old temple graffiti includes mysterious inscriptions like, "The twin shivered," and "The archer ignored the plea." Are these poetic, astrological, or were they just ancient versions of late-night tweets? Either way, you're hooked. At some point, You realize the middle watch has ended. The priest is gone. The fig plate is empty, except for one dried husk that looks judgmental in the moonlight. The sky is now dominated by Orion. Yes, even back then he strutted across the heavens like he owned it. You sit up, bones cracking like dry papyrus. Your shadow barely exists now, smudged by the starlight and the moon. And in this long watch of the night, it hits you. You haven't seen a clock in days. But you've never been more aware of time. There's no ticking, no numbers, just slow rotations. Sky choreography. The kind of rhythm you feel in your chest, not on your wrist. And when someone next to you sighs and says, "Only 2 stars till dawn," you know exactly what they mean. You wake up with a crick in your neck and the odd sense that the stars have been judging your sleeping posture all night. The rooftop is quiet now. No priests, no whispering astronomers, just a few early morning pigeons flapping around the corners of the temple dome like they own the place. One glares at you from a carved lion's head. You glare back, lose the staring contest, and sit up slowly. Your body is confused. Is it morning? Is it still night? You squint eastward, and there it is, the thinnest knife edge of gold slicing through the horizon. The sun isn't up yet, but it's sending advance warning. And the Babylonians, they're ready for it. You shuffle downstairs, sandals slapping against warm stone, to witness what comes after the gnomons and the sundials and the star charts, the water clocks. Yes, time, now in liquid form. Today, you're getting a crash course in how the Babylonians measured time by dripping it into bowls like some kind of ancient, slightly magical barista. Here's your mainstream historical fact to start your bleary morning. Babylonians used clepsydras, water clocks, to track time when the sun and stars weren't reliable, like during cloudy days, temple rituals held indoors, or nighttime astronomy sessions. These weren't slapdash gadgets. They were engineered with terrifying precision, some even marked for different seasons to compensate for changes in water viscosity due to temperature. The priest in charge of the water clocks is particular. You know this because he spends a full 5 minutes rearranging the flow basin so that it's exactly due south, before even acknowledging your presence. Finally, he gestures to a large stone basin with a tiny hole in the bottom, suspended over a narrow funnel that fills another bowl below. The setup is mesmerizing. Water drips slowly, each plink echoing like a countdown. A small stick floats inside the lower bowl, notched with little marks. As the water rises, the marks disappear. Time, literally, is getting drowned. You ask how long it takes to fill. He mutters, 1/3 of a watch. You nod solemnly, pretending you know what that means. And here's your quirky tidbit for today. One surviving text suggests that priests sometimes colored the water with crushed berries to better see the rising level under dim torchlight. That's right. Ancient Babylonian priests invented the original mood-lit timekeeper. Next stop, scented candles. Now, like everything in Babylon, the water clock isn't just a timepiece, it's a ritual tool. You follow the priest into a smaller chamber behind the sanctuary. This is where the temple rituals are paced, not by chance, not by intuition, but by water. Incantations must last 1 cup's rise. Offerings should be burned across 2 bowl depths. It's not drama, it's timing. The connection between water and sacred time gives the whole space a hushed gravity. You watch as a junior priest carefully begins the flow before starting his recitation. His voice is steady, matching the rhythm of the droplets. This isn't just a schedule, it's choreography. Cosmic, drippy choreography. Historians still argue whether the Babylonian clepsydras were used more for ritual or science. Some tablets suggest they measured planetary motion with water clocks, translating star movements into controlled drips. Others hint that timing incense offerings to the moon cycle was the real motive. As always with Babylon, both answers might be true. Sometimes a clock is just a clock. Sometimes it's how you summon your god before lunch. You watch the flow slow slightly, just a hiccup, likely from a speck of grit blocking the hole. The priest grimaces, pokes it with a reed, and the stream resumes. It's a fragile process, you realize. A little dust, and the whole system skews. A bit of wind, and you've gained or lost a star's worth of time. Back outside, you try your hand at it. The basin is heavy, the water cool against your fingers. You fill it carefully, trying not to spill, and listen for the first drip. It begins, tentative, then rhythmic. Like a very slow, very watery heartbeat. The priest nods. It begins. You stand awkwardly. And, now what? You ask. He shrugs. We wait. Time falls. That might be your favorite Babylonian phrase yet. And then comes the twist. Not all water clocks were vertical. Some measured time in reverse. Instead of filling up, they drained. These inflow and outflow types were used for different rituals. Some even came with sloped inner walls to alter flow speed based on the sun's angle, a kind of analog gear shifting 3,000 years early. Another priest passes by, muttering, "Why does this one smell like grapes?" And you remember the dyed water. Maybe don't mention you had a snack over the basin earlier. Oops. Here's something you didn't expect. Babylonian children trained on water clocks. Part of their education, along with learning cuneiform, basic math, and how not to trip on temple steps. Some schools even assigned clock duty as punishment. You spill, you recite the list of kingly ancestors again. Harsh but effective. You spot a scratched clay tablet resting on a shelf. It's a timetable, literally. Lists of expected durations for rituals based on moon phase, star alignment, and water bowl size. Someone, probably centuries ago, penciled in corrections. Too slow. Off by 8 drops. Perfectionism isn't just a modern disease. A breeze slips through the corridor, stirring the torchlight. The bowl is nearly full now. The stick rises, just below the 3rd notch. Time has passed, but you didn't feel it. That's the magic of the water clock. It doesn't interrupt. It invites you to forget your counting. And while it never quite replaced the gnomon or the stars, it offered something else. Trust in time when the skies weren't talking. A fallback. A friend with a steady drip. And in this unpredictable world of weather, war, and wandering livestock, that's a small miracle. You place your hand over the top of the bowl, just to feel the cool breath of time whispering upward. And just as the final notch disappears, the priest says, "Dawn." You step outside, and there it is. The first true gold of morning breaking over the rooftops, catching the edge of the temple dome. The pigeons launch upward in a flutter of wings. The city stirs. And somewhere far above, the stars recede with a sigh. No tick-tock. Just the soft drip of moments, falling into the day. You're barely 2 steps into the temple courtyard when a booming voice startles you from your water clock reverie. "You there! Shadow checker, drip watcher, come with me." You turn and face a man whose robes are dusted with crushed ochre and whose beard seems to be held together entirely by static and ambition. He waves a clay tablet at you like a weapon. "We've got an eclipse to prepare for." And that's how you find yourself pulled into the most elite and most chaotic aspect of Babylonian timekeeping, predicting celestial events. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this chapter. Babylonians could predict lunar eclipses with remarkable accuracy, centuries before the invention of telescopes. They used long observational records, comparing patterns in moon phases, star positions, and, yes, even how long a shadow stretched at certain times of year. Your new mentor/kidnapper is a Uper Enuma Anu Enlil, or more casually, an astrologer priest. That's the guy who reads the stars and scares the king. He jabs at a board covered in tiny cuneiform wedges, muttering phrases like "third watch," in the lion's claw, and "too much smoke last time." He's prepping for tonight, when the moon is supposed to turn red. "This eclipse matters," he growls. "City omens are mixed. If the moon bleeds over the palace, that's bad. If it bleeds over the river, less bad. If it doesn't bleed at all, worst of all, means our clocks are lying." You nod solemnly, the way one does when trying not to get blamed for an apocalypse. Here's a fun little fringe tidbit. Some priests allegedly used sheep livers to confirm time predictions. Not the time itself, but whether the gods would allow a correct prediction. Sort of a divine quality assurance check. If the liver looked unsettled, no ritual, no eclipse. You follow your increasingly frantic guide to a rooftop observatory. It's less sleek laboratory, more organized panic. Bowls of star logs, incantation scrolls, and, disturbingly, what might be a mummified raven line the edges. One apprentice is trying to time moonrise using a gnomon and a rope stretched across the floor. Another is recalibrating a water clock by tasting the drip speed. Salted it a bit, he tells you proudly, so it flows faster in the cold. You slowly step away. Despite all this, there's real precision at work. Clay tablets called the Saros texts contain records of past eclipses spanning hundreds of years. By comparing intervals, Babylonian astronomers noticed that lunar eclipses occurred in patterns, roughly every 18 years and 11 days. Modern astronomers now call this the Saros cycle, but the Babylonians figured it out without knowing the Earth even orbited the Sun. Go ahead, try to impress your smartwatch with that. They didn't just log the when, either, they logged the how. Notes like "moon faded like ash" or "turned to blood near Jupiter" fill their archives. Some even include emotional interpretations. One entry reads, "The moon's eye did not return. Fear filled the hearts of cattle." Either poetic license or the first recorded farm panic. Historians still argue whether these eclipse records were used purely for astronomy or for omen-based divination. Were they scientists recording cycles? Or mystics peering into the moods of the gods? The line is blurry. Like much of Babylon, science and spirituality dance together, and sometimes collided. As the sky darkens and the moon rises fat and pale, tension crackles. Everyone's watching. The city below has quieted. The king himself is probably chewing his fingers behind silk curtains. The astrologer priest mutters a countdown based on his eclipse chart. 3 notches, 2, 1. Nothing. But then, slowly, the lower edge of the moon darkens. Not sharply. More like someone spilling ink across a silver plate. The apprentices gasp. You don't realize you're holding your breath until the priest gives a relieved sigh. The shadow is on time. And that shadow, dear listener, is not from Earth's surface this time. It's the Earth itself, casting its planetary bulk across the face of the moon. The Babylonians didn't know why it happened, but they knew when it would. Sometimes, knowing the timing was enough. You sit cross-legged, watching the moon fade into a coppery orange. A bowl of figs gets passed around in reverent silence. One apprentice tries to whisper a joke, moon's drunk again, but gets a hard elbow from his neighbor. Suddenly, drums echo from the ziggurat tower. A ritual begins. Not to stop the eclipse, but to acknowledge it, to tell the gods, "We saw. We measured. We understood." The priest places a hand on your shoulder. "Time is not always kind," he says. "But if you track its shadows, you can at least be ready for the worst." And here's something you find on a discarded clay tablet hours later, scribbled by some unnamed assistant. Time is a beast that does not sleep, but it can be taught to walk in circles. That line stays with you. The eclipse fades. The moon glows full again. The city stirs, unconquered. You descend the temple stairs, the echo of footsteps like ticks on a clock without hands, and think, tonight, time didn't tell the future. It simply showed up, right on schedule. You're awoken the next morning not by the sun, not by roosters, but by shouting, irritated, scholarly shouting echoing through a dusty hallway. You stumble toward the sound and find 2 scribes locked in heated debate over the length of a Babylonian hour. One insists it varies by season. The other, that hour is a modern word and they're arguing about a mistranslation. You decide it's best to sit quietly and observe, preferably near something edible. Here's your mainstream historical fact for today's slow, scribe-soaked stroll. Babylonians divided the day into 12 double hours, known as baru, based on the sun's position, but these units weren't fixed like our modern hours. They stretched and shrank with the seasons, because they measured daylight, not time from a mechanical perspective. You peer over the shoulder of the louder scribe, who has cracked open a worn tablet showing a day divided into 3 main watches: morning, afternoon, and night, each subdivided into these squishy baru. Summer days, long baru. Winter mornings, blink and you've missed one. And that's where the confusion begins. Because when you try to apply rigid timing to a city whose entire schedule flexes with the sun's mood, you get all kinds of contradictions. Markets open at second light, not 8 a.m. A priest might say, the god will arrive at the 3rd baru, and depending on the month, that's either mid-morning or lunchtime. Not exactly great for making dinner reservations. Still, there was order in the bendiness. You wander outside, back to the Gnomon garden, and find that today's noon shadow is much shorter than yesterday's. One of the apprentices, probably still riding the high of last night's eclipse success, points out that this proves the day is lengthening. The sun climbs higher, he says. So time stretches out to bask in it. Poetic and accurate. You're impressed. Here's your quirky fact for the day. Some wealthy Babylonians hired timekeepers, literally men who walked the streets with portable sundials or water timers, announcing the current Baru and shouting reminders like, "Last Baru before night watch." Think of them as ancient town criers mixed with your Apple Watch. Only sweatier. One tablet you're shown contains something even more curious, a sort of Babylonian time tax ledger, suggesting that laborers were docked or paid based on Baru worked. And of course, the Baru was defined by, you guessed it, the temple's official gnomon shadow, not personal sundials. There's bureaucracy for you. Even in 1700 BCE, someone's watching the clock. And oh, did they love math. The Babylonian base, 60 number system wasn't just for show. It let them slice time into elegant parts, 30, 60, 360, and do things like calculate planetary cycles, star movements, and ritual durations with stunning ease. Imagine trying to make a complex lunar calendar using Roman numerals. Babylonians had it better. Historians still argue whether the Baru system was standardized across cities like Babylon, Ur, and Nippur, or if each temple imposed its own time. Some evidence suggests cross-city trade forced a certain syncing of time units, but other tablets complain bitterly about merchants arriving half a Baru late from the next city. So yeah, even ancient delivery guys were blaming traffic. As the sun climbs higher, a familiar rhythm settles in. Children chase each other in the courtyard, while old men argue about whose crops drink more sunlight. In the shade of a tall obelisk, a group of scribes gather for a lesson on dividing Baru into gesh, a smaller unit that loosely maps to about 5 minutes. Of course, nobody's using a stopwatch. They're using, what else? A water clock marked with tiny lines. You watch one boy lean in, counting under his breath, squinting with a seriousness usually reserved for taxes or mangoes. Later, you're shown a rare and peculiar item, a shadow dial etched into a clay tablet, designed to be laid flat with a peg in the middle. It's not portable, not elegant, but it's mathematical perfection. Little wedge marks show divisions of the daylight hours for a specific day of the year. A crude analog to a modern watch face, except it melts away when the sun shifts. Use it wrong, and you're late to your own funeral rite. You ask someone how night was measured. Stars, they say with a shrug. And priests. Apparently, each Baru of night was matched to a specific star or star group rising or falling in the sky. If you knew your constellations, you knew the hour. If not, well, you hoped the priest did. And if you're wondering how anyone remembered all this, they didn't rely on memory alone. Clay tablets upon clay tablets detail training exercises for temple novices. One example, if the gnomon's shadow reaches this line, what Baru is it? Another, how many drops until the next shadow watch? It's like time-based Sudoku, written in ancient mud. At dusk, as the light stretches golden across the stone walls, a boy climbs the temple stairs holding a stick of charcoal and a scrap of linen. He's drawing the shadow line, updating it for tomorrow's teaching. You realize that this kid isn't just copying a schedule. He's contributing to a living, adapting system. A system that breathes with the sky. You sit beside him for a while, watching as he scribbles notes in the corner of the step. Today, sun slower. Maybe wind. He's wrong, but charmingly so. You write beside it. Or maybe the sun was sleepy. He nods solemnly. This will probably be quoted in a lesson someday as divine insight. Oops. As twilight slides in and the stars begin to blink awake, you stretch your legs and watch a priest strike a bell. 1 clang per Baru. The first night watch begins. No apps. No alarms. Just shadows, stars, water, and the whispered agreements of hundreds of years of watchers. And somewhere, between sunset and moonrise, you finally begin to understand what they've known all along. Time doesn't tick. It sways. You wake up in the courtyard to the sound of sandals shuffling over broken pottery, and a goat bleating in what you swear is judgment. Someone's dropped a basket of dates, again, and 2 apprentices are arguing over who was supposed to feed the temple's sundial keeper. Yes, apparently that's a full-time job. And today, you're finally invited behind the curtain, or more precisely, behind the woven reed screen, to see how Babylonian calendars were tracked and maintained. You stretch your legs, scratch at the straw that's worked its way into your tunic, and follow a priest through a long hallway that smells faintly of ink, oil, and roasted onions. Your historical fact of the day: the Babylonian calendar was lunisolar, meaning it followed both the moon cycles and the solar year. Months began with the first visible crescent of the moon, which meant time was both watched and waited for. You couldn't just assume a month had started, you had to see it, and sometimes the clouds didn't cooperate. Your guide gestures toward a towering wall of clay tablets, each labeled by month, phase, and celestial events. This, he says with the flair of someone who doesn't get enough visitors, is the king's calendar. You nod with the solemnity of someone trying not to trip on a goat tether. The calendar kept everything on schedule: crop planting, tax collection, religious festivals, and of course, the king's dramatic birthday parties. But since lunar months are only about 29.5 days long, the 12 months added up to about 354 days, too short for a full solar year. So every few years, the Babylonians added an intercalary month. Basically, surprise! It's second Ulyalu. Historians still argue whether this bonus month was inserted by formal rule or priestly intuition. Some tablets show predictable cycles, others suggest the gods revealed when a 13th month was needed, usually when crops or star alignments didn't behave as expected. Bureaucratic decision or divine whisper. Or maybe both. You get shown a ceremonial calendar tablet carved with care, the months laid out like petals of a flower. You try not to touch it, mostly because the priest next to you hasn't blinked in a suspiciously long time. You spot names like Nisanu and Tashratu, months that once echoed across palaces and canals. Each has its signature festivals, omens, and assigned gods. And speaking of gods, one fringe tidbit you learn is that some temples assigned different deities to each day of the month, not just months themselves. The third day of Nisanu? That's for Samus, the sun god. The 27th? That's a good day to avoid large purchases and marriage proposals. Just trust the stars. You tag along to an observation tower just after sunset, where a junior priest scans the western horizon for the thin sliver of the new moon. He's leaning out, squinting with the intensity of someone trying to spot Wi-Fi in the mountains. "If the crescent shows," he whispers, "tomorrow we tell the king to start the new month." You ask what happens if it doesn't. He shrugs. "Then we wait another day. Time bends, not us." You settle in beside a brazier, warming your fingers while the priest recites a sing-song chant to the stars. It's less magic, more tradition, and more than a little sleepy. The new moon finally peeks out like a shy kitten. The priest beams. "It's here," he says. "We'll make the announcement at dawn." The process is surprisingly ceremonial. At sunrise, the temple bell rings 5 times, not the usual 3, and runners dash out with clay notes confirming the new month's arrival. Merchants adjust their records. Farmers start counting days until harvest. Even the kids know to realign their chores. All from one little lunar glimpse. You get a peek at a tablet that combines calendar notes with agricultural instructions. It reads something like, "On the 15th of Arisamna, soak barley. On the 17th, cast prayers to Ea. On the 20th, check roots. If the moon is full and the canal sings, all will be good." It's oddly beautiful. Time isn't just tracked here, it's partnered with. As you walk through the temple's quieter archive wing, you overhear scribes debating date corrections. One's muttering, "No way the moon rose twice in one night," while another insists, "It was an omen. A double moon." Turns out, even professionals argue over old logs. Some things never change. You're shown a sort of Babylonian year wheel, a circular calendar with months etched along the outer ring and key rituals in the center. A gnomon or star pointer would be rotated to align with the current sky configuration. A few scholars believe it may have also served as a kind of teaching tool, like a cosmic calendar fidget spinner. One apprentice pulls you aside and quietly shows you his own invention, a pocket-sized calendar made from fired clay chips tied together with gut string. "For my travels," he says shyly. You turn it over and see abbreviated month symbols scratched in. It's adorable. It's also wildly inaccurate. You smile and tell him it's genius. Because, in a way, it kind of is. You pass through the temple gate just as evening prayer echoes through the city. On the street outside, merchants huddle over calendar boards, adjusting prices and schedules based on the new lunar cycle. One sighs and mutters, "Second Ulyalu again? My goats are going to rebel." You glance up at the sky, where the faint new moon rides low over the rooftops. Its arc reminds you of a bowl just tipped over, pouring a fresh month into the city below. There's a kind of rhythm to it now, like a slow drumbeat that doesn't demand attention but welcomes you to keep pace. The calendar, like the shadow, doesn't push. It invites. You don't plan to rise before dawn, but the city has other ideas. A donkey brays at a truly unreasonable volume, and someone drops what sounds like every pot they've ever owned. Rubbing your eyes, you step out into the cool pre-dawn stillness, and find the temple's inner courtyard alive with quiet, intentional movement. Today, you're joining a group of astronomer priests as they prepare for what they call a night scroll session, hours of sitting, scribbling, and sky watching. This isn't a stargazing party. This is hardcore data gathering, Babylonian style. Your historical anchor for the night. Babylonian astronomers kept some of the most detailed, long-term records of celestial events in the ancient world. Eclipses, star risings, moon positions, planetary movements, meticulously noted on thousands of cuneiform tablets. And not just for science. These records were tools for reading omens, planning harvests, and, of course, predicting time. You shuffle up the temple stairs, your sandals slapping softly against ancient stone, and take your spot behind the priests. They're already bent over clay tablets, murmuring the names of stars as they appear in the ink-black sky. Overhead, the familiar glow of the moon is joined by a brilliant guest, Jupiter, blinking like it knows a secret. Each priest has a specialty. One tracks the moon's path. Another notes heliacal risings, the moment when a star first becomes visible just before sunrise. Another keeps time using a bowl-shaped water clock that drips at a nearly hypnotic pace. You're handed a waxed board with a stylus and instructed to just copy what you see. Which is hilarious, because all you see are dots. Still, you scribble. The fringe fact you learn tonight is that some priests believed each star had a personality. Venus was seductive but fickle. Saturn was slow and wise. The moon, emotional, obviously. They didn't just watch the skies, they told stories with them, like a cosmic reality show that ran on a 1,000-year loop. The stars were not just decorations, they were tools. The zodiac, yes, that zodiac, has roots in Babylonian astronomy. Around the 5th century BCE, priests began dividing the sky into 12 equal parts, each marked by a familiar constellation. These were used not just for astrology, but to measure the passage of the year more precisely. Historians still argue whether these divisions were strictly mathematical or religiously symbolic. Did the Babylonians choose 12 segments for numerological reasons, remember their base, 60 math system, or was it simply a tidy way to sync lunar cycles with the solar calendar? As with most ancient questions, probably both, and maybe neither. You shift uncomfortably on your perch, trying not to knock over the sundial someone set beside you. The stars continue their slow crawl across the sky, and a scribe near you softly hums what sounds like a lullaby. You're too sleepy to ask if it's meant to help time the rising of Sirius. As the first hints of dawn creep into the sky, blues melting into smoky gray, you're invited to witness a rare moment, the priests comparing last night's notes to observations from 100 years ago. They pull out a large, cracked tablet, inscribed with looping entries that note, "On this day, the moon stood near the bull." They mean Taurus. And yes, it's happening again today. The priest nods, satisfied. "The sky remembers," he says. "We just have to listen." You blink at the idea that ancient Babylonians had working ephemerides, schedules of where celestial bodies would appear over time. These records weren't just superstition. They were predictive and stunningly accurate. Centuries of patient observation allowed them to predict lunar eclipses, planetary retrogrades, and seasonal shifts with uncanny precision. You're shown one of the more controversial tools, a multi-columned omen tablet where sky events are matched with social outcomes. If Jupiter stands in the lion, the king will see prosperity. Or, if the moon is swallowed on the third night, famine will come. Some entries are strangely specific. If Venus is bright and no one trips, the river will flood late. Historians still argue if this was scientific cause and effect or just every possible outcome written down somewhere. Ancient hedging. The sun begins to rise in earnest, and the priests stand to stretch their backs. One of them mutters something about bad star posture, which you assume is a joke, but honestly, you're not totally sure. You step away from the tower as the golden light creeps up the temple walls, casting long, deliberate shadows across the stone. And just like that, you're back in time. Not in the grand sense of era or century, but in a very real, very physical way. Because these star logs, these scratchings on baked mud, are what passed for clocks before clocks. There was no ticking, no quartz, no gears. Just the slow dance of lights across the sky, patiently recorded by generations of insomniacs with fantastic handwriting. A soft breeze kicks up as you descend the stairs, and you catch sight of a young girl sketching stars into the dirt with a stick. She's copying the sky, not because she has to, but because it's fun. It's that same sweet impulse behind every childhood drawing of the sun with a smiling face. You can't help but grin. Nearby, a priest is instructing students on how to create star path diagrams, mapping the moon's journey relative to familiar constellations over the course of a month. You listen in and catch this phrase, "The stars do not stop, but they do wait." You ask him what he means. He smiles. They wait for someone to watch. And that's really it, isn't it? The sky only becomes a clock once someone decides to read it. Until then, it's just pretty dots on a dark ceiling. You glance back one last time before the sunlight erases the stars. The city yawns, stretches, and begins another day, its rhythm not dictated by machines but by memories, of stars once spotted, shadows once measured, and stories still passed down like heirlooms made of moonlight. Time here isn't told. It's remembered. The morning heat is already smudging the horizon when you're led to a quiet garden behind the temple, an odd oasis of reeds, pebbled paths, and bees who take their sunlit duties very seriously. A priest meets you by a low bench and motions for you to sit. No stars today, no clay tablets. Just stories. Because today, you're diving into something the ancient Babylonians valued as much as precision: myth. See, for every tablet carved with numbers and time cycles, there were stories whispered by candlelight, fables that tried to make sense of the sky's strange schedule. And before they ever charted Venus or plotted the moon's arc, they asked the question that every civilization has wrestled with: why does time move the way it does? Your first myth, the tale of the god Marduk creating the world. In this chaos before order story, the heavens are formed from the split body of the primordial goddess Tiamat. From her eyes come the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and from her belly, the sky. Marduk arranges the stars as markers, commanding the moon to define months and the sun to illuminate days. The calendar, in this view, is not just a tool. It's an act of divine surgery. One historical truth in the mix: Babylonian temples were not just spiritual centers, they were observatories, staffed with scholar priests trained in both math and mythology. They didn't separate science from story. The math gave them predictions. The stories gave them meaning. A fringe tidbit you come across today is that some clay tablets feature short, handwritten prayers squeezed between time logs, as if a priest paused his calculations to whisper hopes into the margin. May the stars rise gently. May the eclipse not swallow the barley. It's like if NASA released a launch trajectory with "Please let this work" scrawled in Sharpie. You listen to another legend, this one about Samus, the sun god, and his rivalry with the night. Each evening, he's said to ride down into the underworld, only to re-emerge in the east come morning. This was more than a poetic image. It was the basis of how people conceptualized time's daily loop. The sun didn't rise. It returned. That made every morning a kind of miracle. Historians still argue whether these sun and moon myths influenced the actual structure of Babylonian timekeeping, or were shaped by it. Did Samus ride because the day began when light touched the ziggurat? Or did the priests declare dawn only once they saw the sun, because their stories said he had to arrive on schedule? The answer lies somewhere in that dreamy middle ground between faith and functionality. As the garden breeze stirs a line of prayer flags, the priest shares an even older tale, of a golden tree that marks the changing seasons, growing fruit in the spring and shedding silver leaves in the fall. When winter comes, it sleeps underground with the moon. Some say this myth became the symbolic root of how Babylonians understood the year, not as a line, but as a circle. Time, to them, wasn't marching forward. It was cycling, pulsing, breathing. Like the river. Like the stars. The priest hands you a chipped tablet with faint symbols you can barely read. He tells you it's a poetic fragment, something a student once etched between math lessons. It speaks of time as a serpent eating its tail, of nights stitched together like beads, of the stars as lanterns strung on heaven's laundry line. You can't help but smile. Who knew the ancient world had a flair for metaphor? But it's not all lyrical. Some myths are downright unsettling, like the idea that eclipses were sky warnings, sent when the gods were angry or displeased. In one eerie tradition, a substitute king would be appointed before an eclipse to absorb any divine wrath, sparing the real king's fate. Once the threat had passed, well, let's just say the substitute didn't get a retirement package. You sit back and stare upward through a trellis of reeds. The sun's angle now is sharper, one of those late-morning beams that slashes through everything, including your eyelids. But you're not squinting. You're thinking about how every civilization has tried to cage time in its own way. The Babylonians just happened to do it with stories as much as sundials. One apprentice is nearby, carving a personal version of time, a small medallion etched with suns, moons, and tiny winged figures. For protection, she says. To wear when I'm unsure what day it is. You nod. Some mornings, even now, that would be handy. You start to notice how deeply personal time is here. It's not just a schedule. It's your family's planting calendar, your festival countdown, the marker of when to mourn or marry. Time tells you when to light incense for the dead, and when to bathe in the river for luck. It isn't digital. It's woven into your life. Even your food tastes of time. You're offered honey cakes baked only on the last day of the month, round, soft, marked with a cross to signify the moon's change. You take a bite. It's sweet, but faintly earthy, like it remembers things you've forgotten. You wander the temple garden a bit longer, half listening to a priest tell a group of children about the moon as a silver boat that sails across the sky. And when you don't see it, he says, it's hiding under the earth listening. One kid gasps. Another just pokes a beetle with a stick. There's something peaceful in this approach, this gentle mixing of wonder and record-keeping. The Babylonians didn't need to choose between exactitude and imagination. They lived in the overlap. You find yourself sketching stars in the dirt without even realizing it. Because here, time isn't something that traps you. It's something that includes you. Midday arrives with the weight of a heated blanket dropped straight from the sun. The air shimmers, everything smells faintly of baked earth, and even the dogs seem to have surrendered, flopped sideways under scraps of shade like fur puddles. You, however, are being nudged gently but insistently toward the edge of the city. You're going to the fields. Not because you've suddenly taken an interest in irrigation techniques, but because this is where Babylonian timekeeping stretches its dusty legs. The rhythms of planting, harvesting, and tending weren't left to guesswork. They were tethered directly to the sun, the stars, and sometimes a priest with a clay tablet and a serious squint. The first thing you learn, Babylonians divided the year into 12 lunar months, adjusting periodically with intercalary months to keep things synced to the solar calendar. Basically, every so often, they'd toss in an extra month, like ancient daylight savings time, but with more oxen involved. Your guide today is a farmer-priest hybrid with a sun-scorched face and a laugh like gravel. He walks you through rows of barley, dates, and legumes, pointing out stone markers etched with calendar notations. These aren't tombstones. They're agricultural clocks, reminders of when the equinox arrived last year, or when the rain started 3 harvests ago. He gestures toward the sky with a trowel. When that star appears, he says, we begin to dig. He's pointing to Sirius, the dog star. To the Babylonians, its reappearance in the early morning sky signaled seasonal transitions, especially the time to plant summer crops. A single point of light, rising like a whisper over the desert, was a green flag from the cosmos. A fringe fact bubbles up here. Some early Babylonian almanacs included weather predictions tied to star positions, claiming things like, if Venus appears in the west, storms will come late, or Jupiter high at dawn means dry roots. Whether these were based on patterns or celestial guesswork, no one can quite agree. Historians still argue whether such star-based agriculture was consistently reliable or more symbolic, a ceremonial schedule used to reinforce social rhythm. But one thing's clear, for the Babylonians, time didn't just pass. It arrived, like a guest. And you had to be ready for it. You're led to a sundial carved directly into a flat rock, its gnomon casting a skinny shadow across concentric circles. It looks basic, but when placed precisely and read by someone who knows what they're doing, it can give the hour of the day with eerie accuracy. Here in the fields, that mattered. Shade length determined breaks. Shadow angle told when to move the cattle. The sun was your foreman, and it didn't need to yell. At one point, a child rushes over with a small clay whistle shaped like a frog. "Listen," he squeals, blowing a note that sounds like an asthmatic toad. "It means the moon is old." His older sister smacks her forehead, but you ask anyway. Turns out, certain sounds were used ritually during the waning moon to mark the final days of the month. Part celebration, part superstition, part early calendar alert. You're invited to a lunch of sun-dried dates, flatbread, and lentils eaten in the shade of a fig tree. Everyone chews slowly, listening to the buzz of cicadas, a sound so steady it starts to feel like a ticking clock. You close your eyes, drowsy, full, and marveling at how thoroughly time has soaked into every part of this life. Then someone passes around a braided cord, red, yellow, and black threads knotted at intervals. "For counting days," says the farmer, showing you how each knot represents a step in the month. Markets, rest days, rituals. It's like a wearable planner, pre-Google Calendar. You spot more of these cords hanging in doorways, tied around infants' wrists, even looped over livestock horns. The knots aren't just reminders. They're symbols, miniature, portable timelines. A way to carry the sky with you. As you explore the edges of the field, you come across a small shrine to the god Ninurta, patron of farming, war, and scribal wisdom. A stone basin beside it contains dried barley, honey, and, peculiarly, a single bronze needle stuck upright in a wedge of clay. The priest explains that the needle casts shadows to measure ritual timing, especially offerings. Divine dinner bells, essentially. You ask why the needle is so thin. The priest grins. "Because the gods are not blind. A skinny shadow offers more precision," he explains, "so the offering arrives exactly when the stars say it should." Of course. By late afternoon, everything slows to a standstill. Even the bees are sluggish now, and the air smells like metal and wheat. The farmer priest sits beside you and carves a line in the dirt. "This," he says, drawing a semicircle, "is time." Then he scratches another circle inside it. "This is us." You ask what happens when they no longer fit. He shrugs. "Then we wait for time to move again." That sentence sticks with you as you rise to leave. It's not that time moves in Babylon. It's that you move with it. You wait for the stars to rise. You listen for the wind to change. You plant when Sirius winks. You kneel when the moon bleeds red in the sky. Time is something you're woven into, not something you wear on your wrist. As you walk back toward the city, someone behind you rings a small bell. It echoes faintly, almost lost in the thick heat. But it's enough to remind you, the stars are still turning. And somewhere, a priest is watching the shadow of a fig branch slide along a stone. He's not checking the hour. He's just making sure the world is still on schedule. Evening slips in softly, not with a bang or burst, but like a warm cloth gently draped over your shoulders. The skyline, ziggurats, domes, distant date palms, melts into shades of rust and plum. And once again, the shadows take the lead. You're back in the heart of the city now, pulled toward a quiet rooftop near the Temple District. It's high enough to feel the breeze, but low enough to still hear street chatter. A student meets you there, tablet in hand, already blinking at the first stars. You know what this means. Night watch duty. This wasn't just about looking pretty for the gods. Babylonian scribes, often temple apprentices, worked in shifts to observe the stars and record when specific celestial bodies rose or disappeared. This data wasn't just stored. It shaped time itself. You ease down on a rough cushion, squinting up. The sky's going violet, like old parchment rinsed in ink. You're handed a small wax tablet, a temporary notepad, basically, and a stylus. You can try, the student offers, like someone letting you drive their camel. The first real task, watching for the heliacal rising of a specific star, that is, the moment it becomes visible just before dawn after being hidden in the sun's glare for weeks. This might seem like a cosmic game of hide and seek, but for the Babylonians, it was everything. A heliacal rising might mark a festival start, or warn of an impending storm season. You get caught up in trying to spot Aldebaran, a bright red star in the constellation Taurus. The student tells you it was a favorite among certain priestly astronomers, both for its beauty and its timely reliability. The name used for it, the torch. Fitting. There's even a fringe theory, one of those delightful Babylonian oddities, that some temples trained birds to mimic star patterns, arranging small oil lamps in constellations to teach apprentices how to recognize them before seeing them in the sky. Historians debate whether this is exaggerated or apocryphal, but hey, if you've ever tried learning Orion's belt by candlelight, you'd understand the appeal. The night deepens. The moon hangs low and fat, gibbous waxing, and you can feel how different it is to measure time now. There's no ticking, just movement. Light creeps and fades. Shadows stretch. Your body becomes the dial again. You ask the student if they ever get tired of it, watching the same stars, the same shadows, night after night. She laughs. Only when the clouds lie. Because, you see, clouds were the worst kind of mischief. They didn't just obscure the sky. They interfered with time. A delayed rising could shift entire rituals. One mistimed observation might throw off a festival, or worse, a royal omen. You imagine a nervous priest squinting upward while a king taps his foot, waiting to decide whether to go to war based on whether Venus showed up on time. Historians still argue whether these rituals were more religious performance or astronomical necessity. Were the ceremonies guided by the stars, or were the stars fitted neatly into the ceremonies already planned? A faint gong sounds in the distance. That means the next shift of observers is climbing up somewhere across the city. Babylon didn't rely on a single pair of eyes. It had layers. One priest might be tracking Mars, another mapping the moon's horns, another taking down wind direction and humidity, because yes, even wind mattered, especially for interpreting omens. You're shown an ideal sky record, a tablet with clean rows of symbols representing celestial positions. Perfect, symmetrical, orderly. Then the student hands you a more common version. It's smudged, cracked, uneven. A note in the corner reads, roughly, clouds again. Saw nothing. Likely still Taurus. You grin. Timekeeping wasn't always majestic. Sometimes it was guesswork and hope, just like everything else. Now, something different. You're handed a flat disk carved from bone, each quadrant etched with different moon phases. Moon calendar, she says. Spins to show the day. You try it. It clicks lightly, satisfying like a fidget toy. Some believe these were used by midwives to track fertility or by traveling merchants who couldn't carry bulky tablets. Miniature time, pocket-sized cosmos. As the night cools, a senior priest arrives and begins a quiet chant. It's not grand or showy, just syllables rising with the wind. You ask what it means. The student shrugs. Some old moon hymn, probably from Sumer. We just like how it sounds. That tracks. Not everything recorded was understood. Some sounds were kept out of habit, like humming a tune you don't remember learning. One last shadow demonstration, a small vertical stick planted in a clay pot, angled precisely to catch starlight. As a star passes over, the shadow shifts, subtle but noticeable. The apprentice lights a lamp and points to the barely there line that forms across the rim. Midnight marker, she whispers. You lean in, close enough to see the flicker, the shadow, the moment it slips. You realize something strange. Despite the tech, the tablets, the chants, all of this boils down to waiting for a shadow to move. That's all. Whether it's a sundial or the edge of a moonbeam across a bowl of water, Babylonian time was tactile. It wasn't an abstraction. It was something you felt, on your skin, in your breath, in the way your own shadow bent against a mud wall. The student sighs, stretches, then offers you a clay charm, something like a souvenir. It's in the shape of a crescent moon, tied to a cord. For sleep, she says. To keep your dreams on time. You thank her, slipping it into your palm. It's cool, worn smooth. Feels like holding a tiny sliver of night. Above, the stars keep inching westward. They don't rush. They don't worry. They've done this for millennia. And here you are, one small observer among thousands, watching the sky turn, night by night, marking a shadow, spinning a disk, and whispering to the moon. The world is quiet now. Even the city seems to hold its breath as the stars fade one by one, sinking beneath the lightning sky. You're standing on the temple steps as dawn slides in like silk across stone, brushing the tops of ziggurats and waking the pigeons early. A soft breeze moves the scent of last night's incense through the streets, charred resin, old smoke, crushed flowers. Babylon stirs again. But you're not here for the morning bustle. You've come to see how it all ends. Or, more accurately, how it resets. Because here, time isn't a straight line, it's a circle with smudged edges. A wheel spinning under stars, nudged along by shadow and sun. You slip inside the temple, still cool from the night. Priests begin their slow ritual, sweeping the floors with palm fronds, lighting oil lamps, laying out flat cakes and jugs of milk. These aren't snacks, they're offerings, timed precisely to align with celestial events, the positions of Jupiter or the sliver of a new moon. Over in the corner, a boy presses a clay tablet against a carved stone to make a copy of the current date according to the lunisolar calendar. It's a practiced motion. Thumb the wet clay, press, lift, and mark. Time, replicated in miniature. You get a peek at today's date, the 3rd day of Tashritu. That's the 7th month in the Babylonian year, associated with endings and beginnings. It's when kings were crowned, debts were forgiven, and the Akitu festival took place, a celebration of renewal, full of chants, processions, and some light divine roleplay. It's also when priests reset the calendar, reaffirming that, yes, the cosmos is still doing its job. You're led to a chamber where a massive water clock, called a clepsydra, sits like a sleeping beast. It's a simple thing, really, a large stone bowl filled with water, with a tiny hole drilled at the bottom. Time passes drop by drop. Marks inside the bowl measure the hours it takes to drain. A priest refills it with water pulled from the Euphrates and murmurs a chant as the first droplets slip through. You crouch beside it, listening to the rhythmic trickle. Somehow, it's more hypnotic than any ticking clock. You think, this is how Babylon told night from day when the stars were hidden. Even the king's advisors relied on these water clocks to schedule court appearances and ceremonies, an ancient scheduler powered by gravity and patience. Outside the chamber, the temple scribe is preparing the next batch of observations for the clay archives. He's surrounded by tablets, some newly dried, others already cracked with age. You pick one up and run your thumb along the wedge-shaped impressions, cuneiform script, etched by a reed stylus and baked by the sun. This tablet's an ephemeris, a kind of star calendar, predicting future risings and settings. A Babylonian forecast, though instead of rain or sun, it tells you when Venus will become the morning star again, or how long Mars will stay retrograde. Fringe detail here. Some of these predictions stretch hundreds of years into the future, calculated with surprisingly accurate math for the time. Makes your iPhone calendar feel a little less impressive. Still, historians can't quite agree whether these ephemerides were purely scientific or deeply ritualistic. Were the stars mapped to control time or to surrender to it? You step outside just as the first full rays of sun crest the rooftops. And here comes the moment. The morning shadow of the temple spire stretches long and straight across the central square. This is the last shadow you'll track on this journey. It falls precisely between two carved stones embedded in the pavement, markers from generations past. When the shadow aligns, it signals the beginning of the daytime quarter. Offerings are made. Bells are rung. The market opens. And you realize you've come full circle. Back to shadows. Back to time measured by light and angle and patience. You wander through the awakening city, past open courtyards where children practice writing numbers in dust with sticks. One boy's drawing what looks like a star chart, but on closer inspection, it's a very ambitious attempt at a scorpion. Probably Scorpius, the constellation that dominated the late summer skies. A woman walks by humming something, a lullaby, maybe, and you catch the word sin, the moon god, tucked in the verse. Even in songs meant for children, time and the cosmos sneak in. A merchant nearby adjusts his goods beneath a canopy, carefully placing a sundial in the sun. It's carved into a flat stone with lines scratched in like rays. Nothing fancy, but it works. You glance down, and it's already begun its shift, the shadow falling differently than just a moment before. There's comfort in the slowness of it. Time isn't rushing. It's flowing, gently. Babylonians didn't wear their time. They watched it, shaped by movement, sky, breath, and ritual. And now you've watched it with them, through ziggurats, crop fields, rooftop observatories, water bowls, and sunlit stones. You've seen how they caught time with shadows, recorded it in clay, whispered it in chants, and trusted the stars not to lie. And as the city hums to life, and the final clouds of dawn scatter like crumbs, your eyelids go heavy. So here we are, at the edge of ancient time, ready now to drift forward, slowly, quietly, into the dream that waits behind it. The stars have all gone now. Only the soft light of a waking sun remains, warming the stones and slowly rinsing color back into the world. But you don't need to follow it. You've done enough wandering for tonight. You've traced shadows across temple walls and tilted your face toward forgotten moons. You've watched time fall in drops of water and turn slowly like a wheel of stars above a sleeping city. You've followed priests and farmers, scribes and children, each gently cradling the moment as if it could be held. And now your breath slows. Your thoughts loosen, the way clay gives beneath a careful hand. Let yourself settle into that space between day and night, the liminal hush where the last owl calls and the first rooster hasn't quite found his voice. Let the weight of Babylon's 1,000 years drift down like dust from old parchment, like soot from an extinguished lamp. There's no need to remember every word. No need to keep hold of each fact or name. Just carry the feeling, that soft rhythm of ancient time, unfolding beneath stars, whispered in shadows. The kind of time that doesn't tick or buzz or demand. The kind of time that waits for you. So close your eyes, if they're not closed already. Breathe in slowly. Exhale gently. You're right where you're supposed to be. And time, now, can take care of itself. End of script. Sweet dreams.